Electoral Area Services Committee of Wednesday, October 7th to order. And
move adoption of agenda.
I have an item of new business, please.
Okay, Gerald?
Yeah, just a little discussion on our EA administration service.
Okay, so that'll go under new business.
Could also be business arising. I think we discussed that last time.
Yeah.
Well, let's just do it as, let's do it as a new item. Okay. So adoption of the
Move
agenda
adoption as amended.
Second.
Second. All those in favor, or anybody opposed? Sorry. Nobody opposed. Good. Okay, we have no petitions and delegations. Adoption of the previous meeting minutes.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, moved and seconded. Any opposed? Okay, we're done. Any business arising? Okay, and public considerations, none. Move on to staff reports, Quadrilinks discharge of covenant.
Move
Item E,
receipt of
which is-
report.
Second.
Okay,
John will speak to this,
Seconded.
Mr. Chair.
Yep, go ahead, John.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. This covenant release relates to a covenant that was established on the former Quadrilinks Golf Course property in 2002, basically to ensure that the operation of the golf course would not negatively impact the adjoining properties with respect to their water supply and water quality, and also stormwater drainage control. And these were key concerns during the rezoning process at that time. So because now the northern part of that property is to become a residential subdivision, this covenant no longer has any relevance to that that part of the property. And the covenant will remain in force on the golf course property that's been used for a golf course, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, and since that is the case.
I have a question, Mr. Chair.
Okay, go ahead, question.
I have a question through the chair to our planner. So the people who lived near the proposed strata subdivision, they had believed, or they believe, that they have a covenant to protect their well water. So since there's going to be new owners in the strata subdivision, is there any intention of the regional district to apply a covenant to the strata properties? Because if they drill wells near the people behind them, they could affect those people's wells. And you know, I think that the people that went to the public hearing on Quadrilinks expected their well water to be protected. So I'm just wondering how that's going to work.
Thank you. Through the chair, the Ministry of Transportation, which is regulating this subdivision process, has required considerable studies and I guess also not so sure about covenants, but they certainly have very much a concern that any new subdivisions that are registered today or at this time would not impact neighboring properties or the surrounding infrastructure. I don't believe that this subdivision is going to be impacting the water supply of neighboring properties. If I recall at the time, that the concern was that the golf course would be using basically fertilizers and so on, and affecting the quality of the water. That was a big concern. Eutrophication as well. And of course, you have to water a golf course, but private households wouldn't be using the same amount of water because there isn't the same amount of the greens lawn to be maintained, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you, John, and thank you, Brenda, for the question. It certainly is, your memory is correct. The water was a big issue, and the applicants for the golf course, the entire property, which I think is around 65 acres or something, they had to do 3 test wells around the area and do drawdown tests on those areas. So they ran their water at full capacity at the golf course for a period of time. I believe it had to be at least 24 hours, and then they watched the other wells to see if there was any impact whatsoever. So they passed that, and there was an extensive engineering study, if you remember, that said it was okay. So now what this is doing, as I understand it, and the only reason that I'm going to support it is because the line has been drawn to subdivide the property. So residential development could take place, but the covenant for the water, et cetera, will remain on the golf course. So they will still not be able to do any of the residential development or any of the other things on the golf course property at all under this covenant. So we're not removing the covenant from the golf course property. It's just from the other property. Is that correct, John?
That is correct, Mr. Chairman, yes.
Okay. So
Director Anderson.
with that
has
being the
a
case,
question.
I do have a question.
Okay, yep, I see. There. Go ahead.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Nova.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I do share some of this concern. On the face of it, it looks fine. The staff report is pretty clear. I haven't read, every detail of the covenant, but I am concerned that there doesn't seem to have been a public outreach beyond the publication of this agenda on this matter. And although it might seem straightforward to planning staff and to us as directors looking at it, I don't know what the public thinks about this. And this was was a big issue, and I imagine the covenant offered some level of support for the project. And so I'm cautious about us removing covenants without some significant public outreach, because usually covenants, when they're registered with a third party, are pretty long-term and binding. And us as covenant holder is a very different situation where we can remove them without, other parties agreeing to do so. So I wonder about the repercussions of actually going out to the neighborhood or the community, consulting on this one before removing them. Thanks.
Thank you for that, Nova. And I think that it's a very good point. The issue of third-party covenants has been, on our agendas numerous times in the past. And for example, mentioned that they're much more difficult to remove because it takes all 3 parties to agree. And people have been opposed, the public has been opposed to 2-party covenants between a developer and the regional district because either one of them can come forward with a request to remove the covenant. And that has basically no public process involved. So you're absolutely right there. And I don't know, I do know from past experience with 2-party covenants that we have removed them. And there have been a couple that I have received negative feedback on. for removing them without public input. So I have to ask planning staff and perhaps our corporate staff, is there a way for us to do something like what we do with the announcement of a waiver of a public hearing or something like that, where we have to do just notification to the public that says, this is what we're going to do. And at least then the public has an opportunity to send comments to either the board or the committee or the director to say what their thoughts are. Is there a possibility of doing that?
Mr. Chair, if I could.
Please go ahead, Tom.
To answer the question that you just asked, I don't believe there is any legal requirement for the regional district to do a community outreach or any kind of consultation on this matter, which does not, of course, prevent the regional district from doing that if it wishes to do it regardless. The other point I would make is that it is my belief, having read through the covenant that is the subject of today's discussion, that it is only applicable to the properties in question if they are developed as a golf course. So the fact that they are not being developed as a golf course, my understanding, means that the covenants really are of no effect. Now that's just my opinion. I haven't consulted legal counsel on that, but that's my plain reading of it. So just for context for the committee as they consider this issue. Thank you.
Mr. Chair?
Okay, so yes, Brenda, go ahead.
I don't see why there would be any difficulty registering a new covenant on, I believe it's 16 units, isn't it, that's being built on the strata. And that could, 17, okay, so that could affect adjacent property water supplies. And these people thought a covenant was on to protect their water supplies. We're removing it from the golf course, but we could ask that a whole new covenant be put on the strata development to protect the water supplies. And if there's no problem, as you say, if the engineering on it is supportive of there's going to be no problem, then they shouldn't have trouble putting a covenant on to protect those other water users. I don't see any trouble with putting a different covenant on and making sure that we protect the neighborhood.
Okay,
There's no
so I
downside.
need some opinion. Staff, can I get some comment from you about whether or not a covenant would be feasible, possible, whatever, on the residential portion of the properties?
Mr. Chairman,
Who wants to take that?
currently looking up to see what the requirements are from the Ministry of Transportation in respect to approving that subdivision. Bear with me just one moment. Okay, applicant to enter into a restrictive covenant in favor of the Ministry of Transportation establishing primary and reserve sewage disposal areas. Okay. Proof of water quantity in the amount of 2,500 litres per day per dwelling must be provided for all lots and any remainders. For groundwater, please provide a well construction report from a registered well driller or pump test report from a registered pump installer. All existing wells should provide documentation done in the last 3 years that the quality and quantity has been met. Okay, reasonable assurance. I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman.
That's the existing covenant you're talking about?
No, this is to approve the 17 lot strata subdivision.
Oh, okay, go ahead.
Yeah. Please submit the water quantity and quality testing results to Ministry of Transportation for review based on the testing results and need for subsequent treatment for future lot owners may necessitate a restrictive covenant registered against title as a condition of final approval. Okay.
Can I interrupt then? So have they received final approval?
Yes, I believe so, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. So that covenant would have had to have been registered prior to that. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes. I would
Okay.
have to see if I can
Continue.
find title.
But that covenant only speaks
Alright,
to those 17 properties. It doesn't speak to the surrounding properties. I mean, we could just,
Hang on. I've got two other speakers ahead of you. Aniko, you had your hand up. Do you still want to speak?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I believe the opportunity for the regional district to request a covenant has passed. We could have contemplated something to that nature during the rezoning process, which we did not. We could have requested that as part of the subdivision referral comments back to Modi, but we did not. And we did not do that due to the fact that Modi was taking care of the water quality and quantity issue, so the regional district did not need to. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you, Aniko. Nova, you were next.
I can't hear you.
Nova, are you on there?
Sorry, talking while muted. It seems like everything that Mr. Neal shared is about ensuring water quality and quantity for the new subdivision. That's fine. This was about protecting the previous property owners prior to subdivision. Although given what Mr. Yates has said, that the covenant is really only in effect for the uses of golf course, I think this is moot, and I retract my comments because they were uninformed, it seems. Unless we want to get a legal opinion on the matter, I think our concerns don't really have a place to land, and we should probably just follow the recommendation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Brenda?
Well, the recommendation as it stands, I mean, the covenant's going to have to be lifted on the golf course portion that's no longer in the golf course, so fine. Good with doing that. I'm just disappointed that it wasn't highlighted to us at rezoning that we should have been placing a covenant on, because I can't believe that 17 more properties are not going to affect the well quantities of the neighboring properties. I think that was a big mistake, and but it doesn't affect the recommendation in front of us.
Well, as you know, hindsight is always 20/20, and we didn't do it. We had the opportunity to do it, obviously, but we didn't, and we didn't see a need for it. It wasn't asked for, so I think, we can't do it now. So we have a recommendation before us to remove the covenant from the portion that's being asked for.
So after receipt, I would
So what
move
would you-
the.
Okay, on receipt, anything further? Okay, all those, anybody opposed? See none. Onward to B, that the committee recommend that the chair and corporate officer be authorized to release covenant EX blah blah over Lot A district lots 122 and 154, say we're just plan, etc., and do all things incidental thereto.
So moved.
Is there a seconder?
I'll second it.
Okay, moved and seconded. Any discussion? Brenda, I've still got yours highlighted. Are you wishing to
No.
speak or lowered your hand?
No.
Okay. All right. And seeing no other speakers, all those in favor, opposed, I'm sorry, Anybody opposed? I'm never going to get used to that. It's just so counterintuitive. Okay, nobody opposed. It's passed. The covenant will be discharged. Number 2, Cortez Fire Protection Property Removal Request. We have a report from the CA. Seconder. Is there a seconder? Okay, that's unusual. No seconder on receipt of the Cortez Fire Protection Report. Therefore, it doesn't exist. Item number 3, request for economic development grant, Quadra Circle Community Connections Society for receipt.
Move receipt.
Second.
Hello, Nova here.
And seconded. Say what? Did you want to speak, Nova? Was that it?
I don't know if Nova's having some trouble with her audio. She's muted.
Thanks. I got cut off and then phoned in, and now I'm back on computer, so I think we're good. Sorry about that.
Did you get cut off at receipt of number 3?
I got
Receipt
cut
of
off.
number 2.
Or 2,
Correct. Before that, yeah.
Okay.
So I'd love to speak to 2 if I might.
Okay.
So number 2 was moved. There was no seconder. What's the process here, corporate folks? It was moved, not seconded, and I said, it no longer exists. Do we move back because of technical difficulties?
Mr. Chairman.
Can we go back?
Mr. Chairman, if I may, you do have a motion on the floor to receive number 3, and I would recommend that you continue dealing with number 3, and then if there's a will of the committee to go back to number 2, then you may do so at that time. That would be my recommendation.
Okay, so on number 3 for receipt, it's been moved and seconded. And that's on the receipt of the report. Any comment,
Nothing.
discussion?
Nothing to add from staff, Mr. Chair.
Okay, so then on to B, which is that the committee recommend that the board approve an economic development grant, Quadra Circle Community Connection Society in the amount of $6,000 to assist with operating costs to be paid from the Electoral Area C Economic Development Service budget.
So moved.
Is moved and seconded. Is there a seconder?
Yeah, second.
Okay, moved and seconded. Any discussion? All those in favor, or sorry, anybody opposed? If I get it right once, okay, we have to put a chalk mark on the screen. Okay.
So,
Nobody
Mr.
opposed,
Chairman,
so it's passed. So back
I-
to, under Tom's advice, we're going back to item 2, Cortez Fire Protection Property Removal Request. Is there a mover for receipt?
I so moved.
Second.
Okay, and there's a mover or seconder. Now we can speak to it. Is there
If I
anything
might-
from staff?
I think
Just
Sean
staff.
will speak to this.
Good morning, Director. Good morning, Directors. This is Sean. Just a brief update on a request that we received 2 months ago about a property owner whose one of his properties is bisected by the Cortez Island Fire Protection Area in the north.
Do you have a mute on your?
Tom,
Okay,
do
go
you
ahead.
wanna?
I didn't mean to cut you off, Sean. I just
Do you need
maybe
him?
we.
Sorry, I'm back.
Okay.
So
Continue.
about 2 months ago, we've been in conversation with a resident whose northern property is bisected by the Cortez Island Fire Protection area. He has asked for that portion of the property to be removed from the area, not paying taxes for a service he doesn't receive. We have forwarded this request to the BC assessment, who is pretty confident that they can help him out and separate the PID tax files. However, when I talked with BC Assessment back in late July, they indicated they believe their data for the property is quite out of date, and that it would be a process to update that file, and it'll take a while for them to help this resident out. But so long story short, it's in the hands of BC Assessment. Once they've worked it out at their end, we'll hear back from them.
Thank you, Sean. Nobody, did you want to speak to it?
Yeah, thank you. In the staff report, the letter from Henry Verschure is dated a year ago, and in speaking with him, he said he's brought this up with multiple people or a couple people before Sean was in his role. So it's a bit of ongoing. And I just wanted to share that Henry's note, which is in the staff report from October 27th, says we would like to not have to pay the taxes we are not receiving services for. And then the report that we received a while ago goes on to say that the citizen was asking to be removed from the fire protection area, which is actually not being asked for. So I'm just really glad that my alternate was able to bring this matter forward last time and drill down into it, because what's been happening, as far as I understand, in reading this and speaking with Henry, is that there's a portion of the property that he's been receiving fire protection on, in theory, and a portion that he's not been receiving fire protection on because it's outside of the fire protection boundary. But he's been paying fire protection taxes on both of those, forever. And so I would actually like to further inquire about if these PIDs are able to be separated, and from here going forward, he's able to only pay taxes on the portion of his property that's within the fire protection boundary. Are we able to issue any kind of reimbursement for the years paid for fire protection that he could not have ever possibly received because it was outside the boundary? I'd love to hear staff on that. Thank you.
Go ahead, Tom.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't believe the regional district has authority to be repaying or refunding or rebating property taxes other than going through a bylaw process. And the reason for that is because the regional district does not actually levy property taxes. We requisition property taxes through the provincial government, which charges for that privilege. I believe it's 5.25%. And the 5.25% is supposed to cover all issues that need correcting after the fact, if I can put it that way. So the province gets stiffed on occasion on property taxes. In some cases, they collect more money because there's new developments that weren't anticipated. In the final analysis, it's my understanding that the money that we pay through the taxpayer to the province to collect property taxes on our behalf is supposed to look after all of these sorts of issues. So I think we would have to study it a bit further to determine whether we could unilaterally as a regional district provide any kind of rebate.
So is there a mechanism then for the province to provide a rebate if requested?
I believe, Mr. Chairman, there is, but of course there would be policies and circumstances and protocols that the province would typically. I think in this case it will depend on where the error arose originally and why Mr. Verschure was being charged property taxes or fire protection tax for his entire property when only a portion of it was liable for taxation. And that is what the assessment authority is looking into. So.
Great. I appreciate it. It seems like something worth trying to rectify if we can. Thank you.
And I do have a question to you, I guess, Director Anderson, and that would be, so your fire department, like the majority of the structures, homes, etc., are just outside the line. If there were to be a fire, it would be my understanding that your fire department would drive up to the line and stop. They wouldn't go and put the fire out. Is that what your understanding is?
That is, for the best of my understanding, in speaking with many other situations where there are properties outside the fire protection boundary, that is, the fire department is required to stop at the line. Now, if in certain circles in the fire department that rule, then they are personally liable for anything that happens. So they really, really try to not do that. The Blue Jay Lake, because it's so far removed and up a very long private road, they'd prefer to just not be in the fire protection boundary at all, but that wasn't actually the original request. At very least, they just like to not pay taxes on the portion that they don't receive fire protection on, because as you say, Mr. Chair, the fire department is legally not allowed to provide protection to most of the buildings there.
Right, and we face the same situation here, but 9 times out of 10, I'm sure that the fire is within squirting distance. I'm sure they would work on the fire. The kicker here is that if they are not, they are outside the fire district, they will be responsible for their own fire protection, because coastal fire will not deal with structure fires. So structure fires take off, they go into the forest, and that's when coastal fire would move in. That could be a very long process before they would see any kind of suppression of the fire. And I find it phenomenal that it wouldn't have gone the other direction and say, rather than request taxation relief, that they have the line moved. It's like it would be a more logical way to go, but it's their business, and I'm only providing comment. Dave, go ahead. You're flashing. Did you want to speak, Dave?
Nope.
Okay. Why does that happen then, John? Every now and then a person's name will start becoming bold and flashing on and off. Is that just a glitch or what?
No, that's normally it's their mic picking up some audio, and then it's just a visual cue to show that they may be speaking or their microphone's not muted. That's all.
But they're not asking to speak. Okay.
Not necessarily.
All right. Are there any other speakers on this particular item?
Yes, I would like to speak, Mr. Chair.
Okay,
have we received the item yet?
well, I believe we're talking
Have we voted on
receipt,
receipt?
right?
After we vote on receipt, I'd like to move that the item be deferred to the, or referred to the BC Assessment Authority.
Hang on, let's go ahead and see if there's any more on receipt. If there isn't, and let's ask, are there any people opposed? I got it right. Anyone opposed to receipt? Seeing none, it is carried.
Move that the item be referred to the BC Assessment Authority with a report back to us.
I believe that's what's happening and has already happened.
Yeah, you're correct.
Yeah, but I'm just putting it on record that that's what we're doing with it, so nobody gets confused in the future.
Okay, is there a wish to make it a motion? If so, I need a seconder. Hearing none, we'll move on. Okay, we did item 3. So we're going to move on to bylaws. As soon as I can get my cursor in the right place. Bylaws 408, 409, OCP and zoning amendment. This is area A. So before receipt, is there a motion to receive the report from the CAO?
So moved.
No,
Where's Gerald?
I don't know.
Gerald's here.
You want to receive it, Gerald?
Move receipt.
Is there a seconder?
Second?
Okay, moved and seconded. Discussion on receipt of the report.
John will speak to this,
Questions?
Mr. Chair.
Ron, go for it.
Oh, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. So this application is a follow-up from a application to remove this property from the agricultural land reserve to allow for it to be rezoned to bring it into conformance with the actual use of the land, which is industrial. So the proposal is to redesignate and to rezone this property from agriculture and rural 20 to an industrial designation and an industrial zone. And the applicant has been in possession of this parcel since August of 2018, and since that time has been remediating the land. And part of the conditions of approval of the subdivision of the rezoning or the ALR removal was that a fence be constructed along the west and north boundaries of the property. And I've received photographs from Mr. The property owner that this fence has now been constructed, and the rezoning and OCB amendment process can now proceed, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Okay, so the fence, the deal was the fence would be constructed before we would consider rezone? Is that correct?
Yes, that's right. Because the fence had to be in position before the property is formally taken out of the land reserve, and before that happened,
Okay.
they couldn't rezone the land.
Okay. All right, so on, this is on the receipt, first of all, anything else? Okay, so no speakers, anyone opposed? It's carried. Okay, on the B, bylaws 40809, be forwarded to the board for first and second readings.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Anyone opposed? That carries. Item C, that the board recommend that they authorize a public hearing to consider bylaws 40849. Mover,
So moved.
seconder. Any opposed?
I've
Carried.
got a question for staff on this, Mr. Chair. Is the public hearing on this a requirement?
Thank you, through the chair. The public hearing could be waived, I understand.
Yeah,
If I may interrupt.
I don't see a
Can I
need.
interrupt? Hold it. I understood from our discussions regarding Kwiatkowski Cove that if there was a bylaw, you could waive it, but if it was an OCP and a bylaw, that you could not waive it. Is that correct?
That is correct, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, so we can't waive the public hearing.
Cannot?
Cannot.
Annako's, is she going to speak, or did Tom answer that for her?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to confirm that it is my understanding this is an OCP amendment, and therefore we cannot waive.
Thank you.
So,
Thank you for agreeing with me.
Mr. Chairman, if I could further confuse the issue, the board could proceed with just an OCP amendment, and once that is done, if the subsequent zoning then conformed to the OCP, then the board would have the option of waiving the public hearing just on the rezoning. That's a more complicated process, but it is there if you want.
Okay, I think I'll
more
stick.
costly. So let's get back to item C. That the board recommend that we authorize a public hearing and that the public hearing be held at a time and place to be determined. We have a mover, we have a seconder. There's discussion. Any further discussion? Tom, is your hand still up or not? Okay.
I have a question, Mr. Chair. Is there a rush on sending it to public hearing? I'm finding the public hearings to be a little bit of a schmozzle, really. I don't think they cut it. Doing it virtually and telephone just doesn't work. And I would rather have a real public hearing in person after we get the vaccine in the new year.
Well, no, I don't think we can base any decision-making on what ifs on the vaccine, the new year, the next year, whatever. We have no idea. And so I'm just going to call that out of order. And say that we have a motion before us, and let's deal with it. If the public hearing is virtual, so be it. The motion is on the floor. Are there any opposed? Seeing no one opposed, it's carried. So I assume that some dates will be put forward to directors from staff. Is that the best?
Yep.
Okay. So we'll get some dates and then we'll make a decision on when it's going to be. Okay, on to new business, which was Gerald. You wanted to.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to make a direction to staff to seek a legal opinion to be brought back to the Electoral Area Committee on whether or not the electoral area directors need the approval of the municipal directors in order to use the EA administration service for electoral area only grants and aid.
Second.
That's not a motion, that's a direction to staff.
Action to staff, so just keep it at that. Is there any problem with that, Dave? I'll get to you in a minute. No.
I have a point of order question.
Okay, what's your point of order?
I'm uncomfortable with direction to staff at a committee meeting from one board member. My understanding is how we work as a board and as committees is through motions, and that is what directs staff. So I'm just wondering under what authority one individual director can direct staff to do work.
Well, I'm going to have to concur. I think, excuse me, when it's kind of clear that we all, that staff understand what the committee or the board want us to, exercise a task, that's one thing. But I think we do operate mostly out of emotions because, try to be consistent. And if this, oops, my earbuds fell out. And, if this is a way to skirt motions going forward to the board, and I wouldn't support that. So we have a similar motion going to the board today, and I would suggest we wait and see how that turns out.
Can I chip in, Mr. Chair? The Comox Valley has had an electoral area services function where they distribute grants and aid from the electoral area services function for years. It's absolutely legal. This is just not right. We should be able to control the services to our taxpayers that come from our taxpayers without the blessing of a bunch of, uninterested municipalities.
Okay, Director Lee, Director Lee, I don't disagree with you, but what you're not understanding is that board would have approved that authority. The hurdle we've had here at times is our board not approving that authority. So it's not that it's legal or unlegal, it's getting it the endorsement of the board to move forward with that. And the CVRD board would have done that at the time.
I think Dave has answered the question, can we do it as direction to staff? And the answer is no.
I have one
So
more.
let's, okay, just more to say on this. Okay. Go ahead, Gerald.
Thank you. Yeah, just a question to staff. If I was to make a motion to fund a grant and aid at our next electoral meeting and to have it paid for by our electoral area service, that would move to the board. But would it only be the electoral areas that would vote on it?
You want to fund a grant and aid, and
yeah, just a regular grant and aid request, but to be funded by the Electoral Area Administration Service. That means we would all contribute to paying for it, but nevertheless.
okay, off the top, I'll say something quickly, and then I'll let Tom answer here. What on the surface that seems to me is you're taking money out of one fund and paying it for another, which is in contradiction to what regional districts and functions and services do. The money contained within those services and functions are paid for by those. No, I know it's not your. Okay. So
just to take it right from our budget for the electoral area services, administration service, not to move it from one account to the other. This is, everybody would pay for this.
Mr. Chairman, if I can respond, in addition to what the CAO has just said, there is no authority under the Electoral Area Administration Service bylaw, as far as I read it, to be making grants and aid. In order to do that, I believe that's the intent, if I understand correctly, of the report going before the board today, would be to look at whether that function, that purpose, that effect can be added to the EA Administration Service to provide for those grants. But currently, I don't believe it exists.
Thank you. Can I also ask then the wording of the General Administration Service that the board has, does it have that specific wording to allow us to take money from it for grants and aid?
Mr. Chairman, if I can respond to that. The general administration for the regional district does not have a service bylaw, and therefore all of the corporate matters that the board deals with that do not fall within a service umbrella are dealt with under general administration, including the ability to provide financial assistance.
Thank you.
That would be part of the milieu, if you will, of things that the board can do under its corporate powers.
Okay, so Gerald, your direction to staff has pretty much been shot down by staff. So we are going to, I assume, just go forward at the board.
So I move termination.
Okay, yeah, we don't need to do anything else on that. It just didn't happen. That would be the next thing, termination.
Second.
Anyone opposed? We are terminated. We'll see you in a while.